Who's this from?
Oh, that's not yours? I can take
No,
it. I was going to say.
not mine. That could be. Yeah, that's what actually was last Wednesday. Pointed at Andy, it's all knowing. Andy's the source of all power. Good morning. Jay, can you lead us in a word of prayer before we get started? So we studied about Joshua last week. We got basically through the period at which they get deceived by the Gibeonites. And now we're kind of in this section where Joshua has the task of setting Israel about conquering the land and inheriting the lands that are given to them. And there are a couple of unique things that occurred there. The one thing in Joshua chapter 14 that becomes pretty apparent is Caleb comes to him and says that there was a promise made for his faithful service to the Lord. And so Caleb gets a special allocation for the land. And as I said, that's covered in Joshua 14. It kind of speaks very clearly to, the Lord is faithful. It's kind of the theme there. And Joshua then goes about distributing the rest of the land, and if you have trouble sleeping at night, I definitely recommend those chapters. There's plenty to digest, and if you make it through those 5 chapters without falling asleep, you're a better man than I. But then one of the things I find most interesting is if you go to Joshua 19, and I'm going to cover this as we go forward. But the last person who is of the tribes to receive their land is Joshua. Okay, and once again, we're going to talk about this as we get into what made Joshua so unique. All the other tribes have gotten their land. Everyone has gotten what is due them. But if you go to Joshua chapter 19, starting in verse 49, when they had finished dividing the land into the allotted portions, the Israelites gave Joshua, son of Nun, an inheritance among them. As the Lord had commanded, they gave him the town he asked for, Timnath-Serah, in the hill country of Ephraim. And he built up the town and settled there. So, once again, one of the things that makes Joshua very unique is, unlike most rulers that we see in the Old Testament, most rulers that we see in life, he doesn't take care of himself first. He's last. And the land he inherits is not the best land. If you go through and read all the discussions of the conquered land, the prime land was in the valley. And there were cities that were already built up. So those were the 2 places that all the tribes were most coveting. Joshua gets a hill country. It has no fortified city. It says later he builds it up, he and his people. So what made that land special for Joshua? And there's nothing in the Bible, so you have to kind of rely on the secular history there. But it was really three things that kind of came out in my studies. One, it was a very defensible land. Joshua, ever the pragmatist, built up a city he could defend. Number two, it was extremely close to Shiloh. Shiloh was where the tabernacle was and where the priest leadership was. And three, it was the hill country, which is where Joshua kind of grew up, where Ephraim inherited their land. So, interesting. He's the leader. He's been the leader for an extended period of time. He's successful. But unlike everybody else, he doesn't really tend to look out for himself. It says the tribes gave the land to Joshua. He asked for it, but God didn't give it to him. The tribes did. So when you think about people who are leaders, one of the greatest compliments you get ever if you're a good leader is you don't ask for anything. They give it to you because of who you are. And that's the symbol you get here with Joshua. The Israelites didn't have to be compelled to give Joshua what he asked for. It was just given. And then as you go down through here, there's an interesting section that occurs when the 2.5 tribes that are east of Canaan head back to their promised land. They build up this altar. And it kind of shows you the things that happen in life. They build this altar as they head back across the Jordan River. And the people of Israel hear about it. And they're deeply offended. This is an altar that's being built to, in their opinion, another god. And so they gather together. They have not talked to the 2.5 tribes, but they want to go to war. But instead, they send people to talk to them, which is, once again, a sign of improvement for the Israelites. So if you go to chapter 22, in verses 10 through 12, it talks about the 2.5 tribes building up the land and the offense that the Israelites take. And then starting in verse 13. So the Israelites sent Phinehas, son of Eleazar, the priest, to the land of Gilead, to Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh. With him they sent 10 of the chief men, one from each of the tribes, each the head of a family division among the Israelites' clan. So the offense is real, but instead of attacking their fellow brothers, they send Phinehas. And it's interesting that Phinehas is sent. Now, I have to admit, I wasn't aware of this, but what is Phinehas famous for before now? Andy? Yep, same Phinehas. If you go to Numbers chapter 25, the Israelites are, for lack of a better word, cohabitating with Moabites. And the Lord sends a plague because they have converted to idolatry. And he sends a plague and he kills 20,000 plus Israelites. And Phinehas was so offended by this, one of the Israelite men brought a Moabite woman into his tent. And Phinehas' solution to this was to grab a javelin and run it through he and her, thus ending the plague. And so this is the reference that the Israelites are using by this altar. And so it's funny that the person going to resolve the conflict is the man who ended the plague. And the 2.5 tribes describe why they built the altar. And if you ever want an interesting reading about what Israelites think about each other, they built the altar because we got a pretty good recollection that you guys are going to sway from God, and we want to have an altar when you do that is sanctified, that we can offer sacrifices. And Phinehas, who is the arbiter of whether or not this is godly, agrees. And so the issue is resolved. Phinehas returns to most likely Shiloh, and the tribes coexist. But it shows kind of how things can happen. Yeah. How many of us have drawn a conclusion by someone's behavior and gotten our dander up, but we forgot one major step along the line? Did you talk to them? Did you actually go and try and understand what they were trying to accomplish before you decided that an act of war was required? And it is the kind of the plight of man throughout its history. We will get offended, but we won't go talk to the people we're offended with. How many people have carried grudges against people but never talked to them? Lots of smiles, so it may have occurred amongst this audience. And it's kind of the takeaway from this event. The 2.5 tribes were not trying to rebel against God, but the other tribes assumed they were, and they wanted to take action, but calmer heads prevailed. So Joshua goes through the last few steps, which is setting up the cities of refuge, and then setting up the kind of the territory for the Levites. And they, as I say up here, they have the peaceful resolution of the eastern tribes. Then Joshua does something that, unlike my allotment of the territories, if you ever want to just kind of go through and get a view of a man who knows his place in history, read Joshua 23 and Joshua 24. It's compelling. And it's a man who knows what his task is. And he doesn't miss the opportunity. Joshua completely rises to the opportunity. And he's basically his admonition to the Israelites. You're in the promised land. How successful you're going to be and how well you're going to be treated is based upon one thing. Are you obedient? And one of the most famous scriptures, for me, I have to remember, I don't remember whose house it was, but I was in someone's kitchen one time, and I was in my teens or early 20s, and I saw this quote, "But as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord." And they didn't have a reference to it. And when I went home and looked it up, lo and behold, it's in this speech. Joshua is telling the Israelites, you as a people have to make a call. What's your direction? What's your focus? What are you about? And Joshua makes it really clear. As for me and my household, we will follow the Lord. And, you know, as a parent, as someone who is running a household, you know, I thought it was interesting that this household put it right there where you couldn't miss it. I think it was actually on the refrigerator. So those of you who have children, that is a place they at least look at during the day. And so, you know, I was always struck by that. But then as you go further, Joshua kind of holds the Israelites' feet to the fire as he gets done with his admonition in 24. So after he tells them what he and his family are going to do, the people respond to Joshua as a whole, and starting in verse 16. Then the people answered, "Far be it from us to forsake the Lord to serve other gods. It was the Lord our God himself who brought us out and our forefathers up to Egypt from the land of slavery and performed those great signs before our eyes. He protected us on our entire journey and among all the nations through which we traveled. And the Lord drove out before us all the nations, including the Amorites, who lived in the land. We too will serve the Lord because he is our God." Okay, So this is their reply to Joshua. My house is convinced. We're focused. We know our passion. The Israelites say, we're with you. Now, you can't read what they just said and not realize that all those things happened, but yet they rebelled against God during this period. I mean, they're talking about a period of time where they did rebel against God. And thus, many of them died in the desert. Joshua doesn't leave it there. Picking up in verse 19, Joshua said to the people, "You are not able to serve the Lord. He is the holy God. He is a jealous God. He will not forgive your rebellion and your sins. If you forsake the Lord and serve foreign gods, he will turn and bring disaster on you and make an end of you after he has been good to you." But once again, the people in unison reply to Joshua, "No, we will serve the Lord." So that's twice. Joshua doesn't stop there. "You are witnesses against yourselves that you have chosen to serve the Lord." "Yes, we are witnesses," they replied. "Now then," said Joshua, "throw away the foreign gods that are among you and yield your hearts to the Lord, the God of Israel." And the people of the Lord said to Joshua, "We will serve the Lord our God and obey him." On this day, Joshua made a covenant for the people there at Shechem. So Joshua has declared his family's obedience. But then he has the people of Israel declare it 3 times. They did it on their own. And Joshua said, just candidly, "You are a witness to yourself. You made this commitment. Understand, you're not living up to the commitment is on you." And the good news about that is it has a direct application to us. No one forced us to become Christians. We made it willingly. We made it knowingly. Same thing applies. Joshua speaks across the ages. You chose God. Your failure is on you. So it's interesting how applicable this story and this leadership of Joshua is as you look past the years that have passed. And then one of the things that I've always been impressed with is, and for me, as Julie is tired of hearing, I think it's the greatest epitaph in the Bible. If you go to chapter 24 and verse 31. Israel served the Lord throughout the lifetime of Joshua and the elders who outlived him. So, as a leader of Israel, the last thing they say about him, "While you were here, we were golden. We followed God under your leadership. We never swayed, and when we did, we corrected quickly. But you led us not only to the promised land, you led us to compliance, and you led us to servitude." And that's, do a Google search or do a GPT search. Find out who else they say that about in the Bible. Not there. It's Joshua. And I've always been compelled by that. It's not just Joshua, though. It didn't stop with Joshua. It's all the people who served with Joshua. So if you go through the timeline, Joshua takes over from Moses when he's about 80 years old. So he's the leader of Israel for about 30 years. For 30 years, they're in compliance with God. And then for another 20 to 30 years, they remain in compliance to God. Because the people who were the elders after Joshua, you have to guess, but that's probably a good timeline. So from 50 to 60 years, the people of Israel conquered Canaan and were obedient to God. And the takeaway is, what made this situation so unique in Israeli history? what type of leadership did it require? And really, why was it so successful? What made Joshua so unique? And so, it's funny, I always find leadership to be an interesting topic because you see so many different styles of leadership. And some people are very charismatic, and you follow them because they're charismatic. Some people are just relentless, and you follow them because you got no choice. You want to stay in that sphere, you follow them, or the price is you leave. You have other people who lead from manipulation. But what made Joshua so unique? What jumps out at you all about Joshua? We've gone through it in these 2 weeks, but what were the things about Joshua that were so different? He was definitely, you almost call it in the writings that you see about this topic, he was a servant leader. Joshua never led from behind. He wasn't the guy who was sitting in headquarters and directing the aerial assault. As Robin said, he was always there. He was a role model. He was out front. I mean, I always think of David. When David had his sojourn with Bathsheba, where was he supposed to be, folks? He was supposed to be leading the troops. That was his role. But no, he got confused and he got lost. So that's one thing. What else did you notice about Joshua? He did. We covered that last week. I mean, the first time we see Joshua, his success on the battlefield is tied to Moses being able to hold his staff up. He is successful, but as soon as Moses lowers his hands, he is a military genius, is sub-optimizing. He's losing. But as soon as Moses' hands are up above, he wins. He understands it wasn't about him. He goes up halfway up the mountain when Moses gets the 10 Commandments. He sits outside the tabernacle after Moses leaves there. He is right next to Moses during that tumultuous period from Egypt to the Promised Land. He sees it all, but he doesn't project himself into that situation. Andy? Correct. Once again, kind of knew his role, was very consistent in it. The thing you read about Joshua, and you kind of can't walk away with this, he just was kind of the steady influence who knew what to do today and focused on today. Other thoughts? Right. Absolutely. I don't know. Good question. I don't know the answer to that. I'll look it up. Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Very, as was said, no deviation. I mean, if you want a pattern of life to follow, the thing you can do for your children, the thing you can do for the people who work for you or the people you come in contact with, is to be utterly consistent, devoted and consistent. It's a hard task. People are always watching. What made, what kept Moses out of the promised land? Disobedience, anger, self-importance. Pick your description of why God told Moses, you're not going. Never happens with Joshua. Never happens. He doesn't seem, and it's you know, you're almost reading between the lines, but you don't see ego in Joshua. It's not there. You can look long and hard of all the recordings of Joshua's time serving the Lord. You would never see where his ego got in the way. So we're at 11:25. Next week we're going to go through about 4 slides that talk about kind of, you know, and once again, this is a collection of people, but I've gone through a number of papers that talked about why Joshua was so successful. And I've tried to capture them, and we're going to go through that next week. And that'll be the end of my teaching, but we're going to talk about what are the leadership principles you can take from looking at the life of Joshua and his interaction and leadership of the Lord. Yes. Yeah, he was. Yep. Thank you.